Sarah Martinez had never expected her Saturday morning coffee run to change everything. At 28, she worked as a graphic designer for a small marketing firm in San Diego, living a quiet life that revolved around deadlines, weekend hiking trips, and her rescue dog Max. She had moved to California 3 years ago after her divorce, seeking a fresh start far from the painful memories of her failed marriage in Ohio. The coffee shop on Fifth Avenue had become her sanctuary. Every Saturday at exactly 8:30, she would order her usual vanilla latte and find her favorite corner table by the window. From there, she could watch the world go by while sketching in her worn leather journal, observing the fascinating parade of people who made up the vibrant neighborhood. This particular morning started like any other. The autumn sun filtered through the large windows, casting golden rectangles across the worn wooden floors. Sarah settled into her usual spot, pulling out her sketchbook and favorite charcoal pencil. The familiar sounds of the espresso machine and quiet conversations created the perfect background noise for her creative process. She had always been a people watcher, finding inspiration in the way strangers carried themselves, the stories written in their expressions, the small details that revealed glimpses of their lives. Her sketches filled dozens of journals, elderly couples sharing newspapers, young mothers juggling toddlers, and smartphones, business people rushing past with determined strides. As she sipped her latte and began sketching a man reading a newspaper 2 tables away, Sarah noticed an unusual commotion outside. A small crowd had gathered around what appeared to be a military ceremony taking place in the adjacent park. Through the window, she could see uniformed figures arranged in precise formations, their movements crisp and synchronized. Curiosity getting the better of her, Sarah gathered her things and stepped outside. The morning air carried the sound of a military band playing a solemn march. She positioned herself at the edge of the growing crowd, careful to maintain a respectful distance from what was clearly an important event. The ceremony appeared to be some kind of medal presentation or retirement celebration. Distinguished-looking officers in dress uniforms stood at attention while a speaker addressed the assembly. Sarah found herself captivated by the precision and dignity of the proceedings, her artist's eye drawn to the interplay of light and shadow on the polished brass buttons and ceremonial ribbons. She began sketching again, trying to capture the solemnity of the moment. Her pencil moved across the paper, recording the proud bearing of the servicemen and women, the emotion visible on some faces, the unwavering attention to protocol that marked every gesture and movement. One figure, in particular, caught her attention. A tall man with silver hair and an imposing presence stood at the center of the formation. Even from a distance, Sarah could sense the respect and deference shown to him by the other officers. His uniform bore numerous decorations, and when he spoke, the entire assembly seemed to hang on his words. Admiral James Harrison was concluding his farewell address to the Naval Special Warfare Command. After 35 years of distinguished service, including multiple deployments and countless classified missions, he was officially retiring. The ceremony marked the end of an era, not just for him personally, but for the entire SEAL community that had come to know him as a legendary figure. Sarah continued sketching, unaware that she was documenting a pivotal moment in military history. Her charcoal captured the Admiral's commanding stance, the way other officers positioned themselves in relation to him, the almost reverent attention of the assembled crowd. She was simply an observer, recording what she saw without understanding its significance. The ceremony progressed with military precision. Citations were read, medals presented, and speeches delivered with the formal cadence that marked such occasions. Sarah found herself moved by the obvious emotion beneath the disciplined exterior of the participants. These were people saying goodbye to a leader they clearly respected and admired. As the formal proceedings concluded, the crowd began to disperse. Sarah closed her sketchbook and prepared to return to her coffee and quiet Saturday morning routine. She had no idea that her simple act of observation and artistic documentation had captured something that would later prove far more significant than she could possibly imagine. Walking back toward the coffee shop, Sarah reflected on what she had witnessed. There had been something almost cinematic about the ceremony, a gravity and importance that transcended the mundane concerns of her everyday life. She felt privileged to have been present, even as an anonymous spectator, for what was clearly a meaningful moment in these people's lives. Back at her table, she reopened her sketchbook to review what she had drawn. Her artist training had taught her to see beyond the surface, and looking at her sketches now, she could recognize the skill and precision that had gone into orchestrating the ceremony. Every detail had been planned and executed with military efficiency, from the positioning of the participants to the timing of each element. The man she had identified as the central figure dominated her sketches. Even rendered in charcoal on paper, his presence commanded attention. Sarah found herself wondering about his story, the experiences that had shaped him, the weight of responsibility he must have carried throughout his career. Her artistic imagination began filling in details, creating a narrative around the figure she had observed. She spent the rest of the morning adding details to her sketches, using her memory and imagination to enhance what she had captured in those brief moments. The exercise reminded her why she had fallen in love with art in the first place. The ability to freeze meaningful moments and preserve them, to find beauty and significance in unexpected places. Later that afternoon, while organizing her art supplies at home, Sarah made a decision that would ultimately change everything. She had been considering getting a new tattoo for months, something to mark this new chapter of her life in California. Looking at her sketches from the morning, she felt inspired by the dignity and honor she had witnessed. The idea came to her gradually. What if she created a tattoo design based on her observations of the ceremony? Not copying anything specific, but capturing the essence of what she had seen, the precision, the honor, the sense of duty and sacrifice that had been so evident in every gesture and expression. Sarah had several tattoos already, each marking important moments or transitions in her life. Her divorce had prompted a delicate cherry blossom design on her shoulder, symbolizing new beginnings. Her move to California was commemorated by a small compass rose on her wrist, representing her journey toward a new direction. This new design would be different. Instead of focusing on her personal story, it would honor something larger than herself, the dedication and sacrifice of the people she had observed that morning. She began working on preliminary sketches, combining elements from her morning drawings with symbolic imagery that resonated with military service. The design that emerged was both abstract and specific. It incorporated elements of naval tradition, anchors, stars, waves, but arranged them in a way that felt artistic rather than literal. At the center was a stylized eagle, its wings spread in a gesture that suggested both protection and freedom. Surrounding it were geometric patterns that echoed the precision and order she had observed in the ceremony. Sarah worked on the design for weeks, refining details and adjusting proportions. She researched military symbolism to ensure her design was respectful and appropriate, learning about the significance of various emblems and traditions. The process deepened her appreciation for the complexity and richness of military culture. When she was finally satisfied with the design, Sarah made an appointment with her favorite tattoo artist, Miguel, who had done her previous work. His shop, Eternal Canvas, was known for its artistic quality and attention to detail. Miguel specialized in custom designs and had a reputation for bringing his clients' visions to life with stunning precision. The consultation went well. Miguel was intrigued by the design and the story behind it. He suggested some modifications to improve how the tattoo would age and flow with the natural lines of her body. They decided on placement along her ribcage, where the vertical orientation of the design would complement her anatomy while remaining easily concealed for professional settings. The actual tattooing session was scheduled for the following month. Sarah looked forward to it with a mixture of excitement and nervousness. This would be her largest tattoo yet, and certainly her most meaningful. It represented not just her artistic growth, but her connection to something larger than her individual experience. As the appointment date approached, Sarah found herself returning to the sketches from that Saturday morning ceremony. She had captured something special that day, something that had resonated deeply enough to inspire a permanent tribute on her body. She felt confident in her decision, unaware that the design now adorning her skin would soon connect her to the very people she had observed from a distance. The tattoo session itself was a meditation on impermanence and commitment. As Miguel's needle traced the intricate lines of her design, Sarah reflected on the paradox of marking her temporary body with permanent ink to honor the timeless values she had witnessed that day. The pain was manageable, almost meditative, and she found herself entering a state of focused calm that reminded her of the disciplined attention she had observed in the military ceremony. When the session was complete and the final bandages applied, Sarah felt a sense of completion that went beyond the physical act of getting tattooed. She had created something beautiful and meaningful, a bridge between her role as an observer and her desire to honor what she had witnessed. She had no way of knowing that this tattoo, born from a chance encounter and her artist's interpretation of a military ceremony, would soon become the key to an extraordinary connection that would challenge everything she thought she knew about coincidence, fate, and the invisible threads that connect strangers across the landscape of human experience. 3 months after getting her tattoo, Sarah had settled into a comfortable routine with her new body art. The intricate design had healed beautifully, and she found herself unconsciously tracing its lines during quiet moments at work. Miguel had done exceptional work, and the tattoo had become a source of quiet pride and personal meaning that she rarely shared with others. Her life in San Diego continued its peaceful trajectory. Work at the marketing firm had picked up significantly as they landed several new accounts, including a contract to design promotional materials for various city events. Sarah found herself assigned to create graphics for everything from food festivals to charity runs, work that allowed her to explore different artistic styles while staying financially stable. It was during one of these projects that fate decided to intervene in the most unexpected way. The assignment seemed routine enough: create a series of posters and digital graphics for an upcoming Veterans Charity Gala being held at the historic Hotel del Coronado. The event was designed to raise funds for wounded veterans and their families, featuring dinner, dancing, and a silent auction. Sarah threw herself into the project with characteristic attention to detail. She researched the hotel's grand Victorian architecture, studied the elegant color palettes that would complement the venue, and developed a design concept that balanced sophistication with patriotic respect. The client, a nonprofit called Honors Call Foundation, had given her considerable creative freedom, asking only that the materials convey dignity and gratitude. As she worked on the designs, Sarah found herself thinking about the military ceremony she had witnessed months earlier. The memory had remained vivid, influencing not only her tattoo, but also her growing appreciation for military culture and the sacrifices made by service members. This project felt like an opportunity to contribute something meaningful to a cause she had come to care about. The initial client meetings were conducted via email and phone calls with the foundation's event coordinator, an efficient woman named Janet Pierce, who provided clear direction and helpful feedback. Sarah never expected to meet any of the actual attendees or honorees until Janet mentioned they might need her present at the event itself for any last-minute graphic needs or photo opportunities for future marketing materials. The suggestion made Sarah slightly nervous. Attending such a formal event felt outside her comfort zone, especially given that she would be the only non-military person in a room full of distinguished veterans and their families. Janet assured her that her presence was optional but would be appreciated, particularly since her design work had impressed the foundation's board of directors. Sarah spent weeks preparing for the event, researching appropriate attire and etiquette for military functions. She settled on an elegant black dress that was formal enough for the occasion while remaining conservative and respectful. The dress also happened to provide perfect coverage for her tattoo, which she preferred to keep private in professional settings. The Hotel del Coronado proved even more magnificent than her research had suggested. The Victorian beach resort stretched along the Pacific coastline like something from a fairy tale, its distinctive red turret roofs and white wooden architecture creating a stunning backdrop against the evening sky. Sarah arrived early to oversee the setup of her printed materials and ensure everything was displayed correctly. The grand ballroom had been transformed into an elegant celebration space. Her poster designs were prominently featured at the entrance, and she felt a surge of professional satisfaction seeing them displayed alongside floral arrangements and patriotic decorations. The color scheme she had chosen worked perfectly with the venue's historic grandeur. As guests began arriving, Sarah positioned herself near the registration table where she could observe the event while remaining available if any issues arose with the promotional materials. The attendees were exactly what she had expected: distinguished-looking men and women in formal attire, many wearing military decorations or insignia that spoke to their service records. What she had not expected was the emotional weight of the occasion. These were not simply people attending a social function, but individuals whose lives had been shaped by service, sacrifice, and loss. Many walked with visible disabilities. Others showed the invisible scars of their experiences, and all carried themselves with a dignity that reminded Sarah of the ceremony she had witnessed months earlier. The evening progressed smoothly through cocktails and dinner. Sarah found herself moved by the stories shared during the presentation portion of the event, testimonials from veterans whose lives had been improved by the Foundation's work. The room maintained a balance between celebration and solemnity that required careful orchestration. It was during the silent auction portion of the evening that everything changed. Sarah had been admiring a particularly beautiful piece of military artwork when she noticed a disturbance near the main stage. An elderly veteran had apparently suffered some kind of medical episode and was struggling to maintain his balance. Without thinking, Sarah rushed forward to assist. Her first aid training from high school kicked in as she helped ease the man into a nearby chair while someone called for medical attention. In the process of helping him, her dress shifted and the top portion of her tattoo became visible above the neckline of her dress. The man she was helping noticed the tattoo immediately, his eyes widening with recognition. But it was the person who appeared at her shoulder to offer additional assistance who would change everything. A commanding voice spoke from behind her, offering professional guidance about the medical situation, and when Sarah turned to acknowledge the help, she found herself face to face with the same distinguished man she had sketched months earlier at the military ceremony. Admiral James Harrison, now dressed in formal civilian attire rather than his military uniform, was immediately recognizable despite the changed context. His silver hair, commanding presence, and the way others in the room deferred to his judgment all confirmed what Sarah's artistic memory had already recognized. This was the central figure from her sketches, the man whose retirement ceremony had inspired her tattoo design. But it was Admiral Harrison's reaction that truly stopped time. As his eyes fell on the visible portion of Sarah's tattoo, his composed military bearing wavered for the first time that anyone in the room could remember. The design she had created, inspired by her observation of his ceremony, incorporated specific elements that held profound personal meaning for the Admiral. The stylized eagle at the center of her tattoo was positioned in a way that exactly matched a memorial tattoo Harrison had been considering for his late son, a Navy SEAL who had been killed in action 2 years earlier. The geometric patterns surrounding the eagle corresponded to a battle formation his unit had used in a classified mission that had never been publicly documented. Most significantly, the overall composition matched a sketch his son had made and given to him shortly before his final deployment. Admiral Harrison found himself staring at what appeared to be a deeply personal tribute worn by a woman he had never met. The probability of such specific coincidences seemed impossibly small, yet the evidence was literally inscribed on Sarah's skin. His usual military composure deserted him as he struggled to process what he was seeing. Sarah, still focused on helping the elderly veteran, was unaware of the Admiral's reaction until she felt the intensity of his stare. When she looked up and met his eyes, she saw confusion, recognition, and something that looked almost like grief. The moment stretched between them, heavy with unspoken questions and impossible coincidences. The medical situation resolved quickly as paramedics arrived and determined that the elderly veteran was experiencing nothing more serious than dehydration and fatigue. As the immediate crisis passed and normal conversation resumed around them, Sarah and Admiral Harrison found themselves standing together in a bubble of stunned silence. It was Harrison who spoke first, his voice betraying none of the turmoil visible in his expression. He introduced himself formally, extending his hand with practiced military courtesy while his eyes continued to study the visible portion of her tattoo. Sarah responded with equal politeness, introducing herself and explaining her role in creating the event materials. The conversation that followed was careful and measured, both participants aware that something significant had occurred but uncertain how to address it. Harrison complimented her design work while probing gently about her background and interests. Sarah found herself drawn to his obvious intelligence and the weight of experience visible in his demeanor. It was only when another guest approached to congratulate Harrison on his retirement that Sarah made the connection. This was the same ceremony she had observed, the same man she had sketched, the same event that had inspired her tattoo design. The realization hit her with stunning force as she began to understand the impossible nature of what was happening. Harrison noticed her moment of recognition and suggested they step outside onto one of the hotel's famous terraces for a more private conversation. The Pacific Ocean stretched endlessly before them as they found a quiet corner away from the party's festivities. The sound of waves provided a peaceful backdrop for what would prove to be one of the most extraordinary conversations either had ever experienced. What followed was a careful exchange of information that revealed the full scope of the coincidence. Sarah explained how she had witnessed his retirement ceremony as an anonymous observer, how the dignity and honor of the moment had inspired her to create a tattoo design that honored military service. She described her artistic process and the symbolic elements she had chosen. Admiral Harrison listened with growing amazement as Sarah's account aligned perfectly with his own memories of that day. He had been aware of civilian observers at the ceremony, but had paid them no particular attention, focused as he was on the emotional weight of ending his military career. The idea that one of those anonymous faces had been moved to create such a personal tribute was both humbling and deeply affecting. When Harrison began to explain the personal significance of her tattoo's design elements, Sarah felt the world shift around her. The discovery that her artistic interpretation had somehow captured not just the general spirit of military service, but specific details that held profound meaning for this particular man seemed to defy all logical explanation. The conversation stretched through the rest of the evening as they explored the implications of their connection. Neither could offer a satisfactory explanation for how Sarah's creative process had led her to incorporate elements that corresponded so precisely to Harrison's personal history. They found themselves caught between skepticism and wonder, rational minds struggling to process an experience that seemed to transcend normal coincidence. As the gala wound down and guests began departing, Sarah and Admiral Harrison exchanged contact information with the careful politeness of people who recognized they had experienced something extraordinary, but were not yet sure what to do with it. The evening had transformed what should have been a routine professional assignment into an encounter that challenged both their understanding of how the world worked. Driving home along the coastal highway, Sarah found herself replaying every moment of their conversation. The tattoo that had been a private tribute to unknown veterans had somehow become a bridge to one of the very people who had inspired it. The randomness of the connection felt almost orchestrated, as if invisible forces had been working to bring them together. Admiral Harrison experienced his own version of the same bewilderment as he returned to his nearby home. The tattoo design had stirred memories and emotions he thought he had learned to manage, bringing his late son's memory into sharp focus in a way that was both painful and somehow healing. The young artist's sincere respect for military service, expressed through permanent ink on her own body, had touched him more deeply than any of the formal tributes he had received throughout his career. Neither could have predicted that this first meeting was only the beginning of a connection that would continue to reveal new layers of meaning and coincidence, challenging their beliefs about fate, purpose, and the mysterious ways that lives intersect across the vast landscape of human experience. The weeks following the charity gala created an unusual tension in both Sarah's and Admiral Harrison's lives. Neither could forget their extraordinary encounter, yet both struggled with how to process an experience that seemed to exist outside the boundaries of normal human interaction. The exchange of contact information had created a potential for continued connection that neither was quite sure how to navigate. Sarah found herself distracted at work, her mind wandering to the conversation on the hotel terrace and the impossible coincidences that had brought them together. She caught herself checking her phone more frequently than usual, wondering if Harrison might reach out, while simultaneously questioning whether she wanted him to. The entire experience had left her feeling slightly off balance, as if the ground rules of her carefully ordered life had suddenly shifted. Admiral Harrison faced his own version of the same uncertainty. His retirement had already created a sense of displacement as he adjusted to civilian life after decades of military structure and purpose. The encounter with Sarah had added another layer of complexity to his transition, stirring emotions and memories he had thought he had learned to manage. The visible tribute to military service that she wore on her body had affected him more deeply than any formal recognition he had received throughout his career. It was Harrison who finally broke the stalemate, sending a carefully worded email 3 weeks after the gala. He explained that he had been unable to stop thinking about their conversation and wondered if Sarah might be interested in meeting for coffee to continue their discussion. The message was formal and respectful, acknowledging the unusual nature of their connection while leaving room for her to decline without awkwardness. Sarah stared at the email for 20 minutes before responding. Part of her wanted to treat their meeting as a beautiful but complete experience, perfect in its singularity. Another part recognized that the questions raised by their encounter deserved more exploration. Finally, curiosity won out over caution, and she agreed to meet him the following Saturday at a quiet cafe in La Jolla. The chosen location was neutral territory, a small coffee shop overlooking the Pacific that attracted an eclectic mix of locals and tourists. Harrison arrived first, selecting a corner table with a view of the ocean and easy escape routes, old habits from decades of tactical thinking. When Sarah walked in, he was struck again by how young she seemed compared to the weight of the connection they shared. Their second conversation proved even more remarkable than their first. With the formal constraints of the gala removed and more time to explore their shared experience, they began to uncover additional layers of coincidence that defied rational explanation. Sarah had brought her original sketches from Harrison's retirement ceremony, and as they examined them together, both were amazed by the accuracy and insight her quick drawings had captured. Harrison studied the sketches with the eye of someone who had spent his career analyzing intelligence and assessing situations. Sarah had somehow captured not just the surface details of the ceremony, but the emotional undercurrents and relationships between the participants. Her artistic intuition had led her to emphasize elements that held special significance. The way certain officers positioned themselves in relation to him, the specific angle of ceremonial sword presentations, the expression on his face during particular moments. When Harrison shared more details about the personal meaning behind the ceremony, Sarah began to understand the full weight of what she had witnessed and later memorialized in her tattoo. The retirement had marked the end of a distinguished career that had begun during the Cold War and continued through multiple conflicts, including the operation where his son had been killed. The ceremony had been as much about honoring the fallen as celebrating the living. The conversation gradually moved beyond their initial encounter to explore their respective backgrounds and perspectives. Harrison found himself fascinated by Sarah's artistic process and her ability to find meaning and beauty in observed moments. Her description of how she approached her work, looking for the emotional truth beneath surface appearances, resonated with his own experience of reading people and situations under pressure. Sarah was equally intrigued by Harrison's stories of military life, though she quickly learned that many of the most significant experiences remained classified and could never be fully shared. She began to understand that his composed exterior protected depths of experience that most people could never imagine, responsibilities and losses that had shaped him in ways that remained largely invisible to the civilian world. Their coffee meeting stretched into lunch, then continued with a walk along the cliffside paths that offered stunning views of the Pacific. The conversation flowed with surprising ease despite the vast differences in their backgrounds and experiences. They discovered shared interests in history, literature, and philosophy, common ground that provided a foundation for deeper connection. As they walked, Harrison found himself opening up about his son in ways he rarely did with anyone. Michael had been 26 when he was killed, a Navy SEAL following in his father's footsteps, but forging his own path within the special operations community. The loss had been devastating not just personally but professionally, creating a conflict between Harrison's duty as a commander and his grief as a father. Sarah listened with the same attentive intensity she brought to her artistic observations, sensing the careful way Harrison chose his words and the emotions he worked to keep controlled. She began to understand that his reaction to her tattoo had been about more than simple coincidence. It had triggered memories and feelings connected to the most painful loss of his life. When Sarah asked to see the sketch that Michael had made for his father, Harrison hesitated before pulling out his phone and showing her a photograph he had taken of the drawing. The similarity to elements in her tattoo design was unmistakable and deeply unsettling. The same eagle positioning, the same geometric patterns, even similar symbolic elements arranged in comparable ways. The rational part of both their minds searched for explanations that could account for such specific correspondences. They explored possibilities ranging from shared cultural symbols to unconscious influence from common sources, but none provided adequate explanation for the precision of the match. They were forced to confront the possibility that some connections existed beyond the reach of logical analysis. Their relationship began to evolve from that point forward, built on a foundation of shared wonder at the circumstances that had brought them together. They started meeting regularly, sometimes for coffee, sometimes for longer conversations that explored the philosophical implications of their connection. Harrison introduced Sarah to military history and strategic thinking, while she shared her artistic perspective on finding meaning in observed moments. The age difference between them, Harrison was 58 to Sarah's 28, might have created insurmountable barriers under normal circumstances. But their connection had been forged under such extraordinary conditions that conventional concerns seemed irrelevant. They related to each other as equals united by an experience that transcended normal social categories. Sarah began to learn about the broader military community through Harrison's stories and connections. She discovered a world of dedication and sacrifice that existed largely outside civilian awareness, people who had spent their lives serving something larger than themselves, often at great personal cost. Her respect for military service, already evident in her tattoo choice, deepened into genuine understanding and appreciation. Harrison found in Sarah a perspective on life that his military career had left little room to develop. Her artistic approach to finding beauty and meaning in everyday moments offered a counterbalance to the tactical, mission-focused thinking that had dominated his adult life. Through her eyes, he began to see possibilities for his retirement years that went beyond the loss of purpose he had been experiencing. Their conversations inevitably turned to questions about the meaning and purpose of their connection. Neither was particularly religious in conventional terms, but both recognized that their encounter suggested dimensions of existence that purely materialistic worldviews struggled to accommodate. They found themselves exploring concepts of fate, destiny, and the possibility that some relationships were meant to exist regardless of probability. The practical implications of their growing friendship began to manifest in various ways. Sarah found herself invited to military functions and veterans events where her unique perspective as both outsider and committed supporter was welcomed and valued. Harrison discovered through Sarah's network of artistic and creative friends a civilian world that was more diverse and interesting than his military-focused social circle had allowed him to experience. Perhaps most significantly, both began to heal from wounds they had not fully acknowledged. Sarah's divorce and subsequent isolation had left her cautious about deep connections with others, particularly men. Harrison's grief over his son's death had created barriers to new relationships that even he had not fully recognized. Their extraordinary connection provided a safe space for both to explore vulnerability and trust in ways that felt both necessary and miraculous. The tattoo that had started their connection remained a powerful symbol of their relationship, but its meaning continued to evolve. What had begun as Sarah's artistic tribute to unknown veterans had become a bridge to personal connection, and ultimately a reminder of the mysterious ways that individual lives intersect across the vast landscape of human experience. As their friendship deepened over the following months, both Sarah and Harrison began to recognize that their initial encounter had been only the beginning of a relationship that would challenge and change both of them in ways they were still discovering. The coincidences that had brought them together seemed to pale in comparison to the ongoing miracle of two very different people finding in each other exactly what they needed most. Neither could predict where their connection would ultimately lead, but both had learned to trust in the extraordinary circumstances that had created their relationship. They had experienced firsthand that the world contained possibilities that rational analysis could not fully explain, and they had chosen to embrace the mystery rather than resist it. The Spectator had become a participant, and the Admiral had found in an unlikely young artist a connection that reminded him that even the most carefully planned life could be transformed by moments of pure, inexplicable grace. Their story was far from over, and both sensed that the deepest revelations about their connection were yet to come. 6 months into their unlikely friendship, Sarah and Admiral Harrison had settled into a comfortable routine that defied every conventional expectation about their relationship. They met twice weekly, alternating between quiet coffee shops where they could talk without interruption and more public venues where Harrison could introduce Sarah to members of the military community who had become fascinated by her story. Word of their extraordinary connection had begun to spread quietly through naval circles. The tale of a civilian artist who had unknowingly created a deeply personal memorial tattoo after observing a retirement ceremony struck many as too remarkable to be coincidental. Harrison found himself fielding questions from fellow officers who wanted to understand how such a thing was possible. Sarah, meanwhile, had discovered that her association with Admiral Harrison opened doors in the veteran community that she never could have accessed otherwise. Her design business had evolved to include more military-related projects as word spread about her authentic appreciation for military culture and her ability to translate that understanding into meaningful visual tributes. The transformation in both their lives had been gradual but profound. Harrison's retirement, which had initially left him feeling purposeless and disconnected, had taken on new meaning through his relationship with Sarah. Her fresh perspective on military service and sacrifice had helped him see his own career in a different light, not as something that had ended, but as a foundation for new forms of contribution. Sarah had experienced her own evolution. The shy, somewhat isolated designer who had preferred observing life from the safety of coffee shop windows had gradually become more confident and socially engaged. Her connection to Harrison had introduced her to a world of people who lived by codes of honor and service that challenged her to think about her own values and commitments. It was during one of their regular Tuesday morning coffee meetings that Harrison made a suggestion that would change everything once again. He had been invited to speak at a major military conference in Washington, D.C., where senior leaders from all service branches would gather to discuss current challenges and future strategies. The organizers had specifically requested that he address the topic of military-civilian understanding and the importance of public support for veterans. Harrison's proposal was both simple and revolutionary. He wanted Sarah to accompany him to Washington, not as a passive observer, but as a co-presenter who could speak from her unique perspective as a civilian who had been genuinely transformed by her encounter with military culture. Together, they could tell the story of their connection and use it to illustrate the potential for meaningful relationships between military and civilian communities. The invitation terrified and thrilled Sarah in equal measure. Speaking to a room full of high-ranking military officers about her experience felt overwhelming, but she recognized the opportunity to honor the connections that had changed her life. After several days of consideration and multiple conversations with Harrison about the format and expectations, she agreed to participate. The weeks leading up to the conference became a crash course in military protocol and public speaking for Sarah. Harrison coached her on appropriate behavior, dress codes, and the formal communication styles expected in such settings. More importantly, they worked together to craft a presentation that would accurately convey their story while respecting the privacy and security concerns inherent in Harrison's background. Their preparation sessions revealed new depths to their relationship. As they worked to articulate their connection for public consumption, both began to understand aspects of their bond that had remained unexamined. The process of explaining their story to others forced them to confront questions about its meaning and significance that they had previously avoided. Sarah discovered that her artistic process had been more intuitive and powerful than she had realized. In recreating the ceremony through memory and translating her observations into tattoo design, she had somehow tapped into universal themes of honor, sacrifice, and service that resonated far beyond her personal experience. Her ability to find and express these deeper meanings through visual art was a gift that even she was still learning to understand. Harrison found himself articulating aspects of military service and civilian relationships that his career had never required him to express publicly. The discipline of explaining their connection to outsiders helped him recognize the extent to which his encounter with Sarah had healing wounds and opening possibilities that he had thought were permanently closed. The flight to Washington was Sarah's first trip to the nation's capital, and Harrison took pleasure in showing her the monuments and museums that held special meaning for military personnel. Walking through Arlington National Cemetery together, they both felt the weight of the sacrifices commemorated there and the responsibility inherent in their upcoming presentation. The conference itself was held at the Pentagon, in a secure briefing room that Sarah found both intimidating and inspiring. The assembled officers represented decades of combined service and experience, including several who had served under Harrison's command at various points in their careers. Sarah felt the honor of being invited to address such a distinguished audience, but also the pressure to prove worthy of the privilege. Their presentation began with Harrison providing context about his retirement and the ceremony that Sarah had observed. He spoke with characteristic precision and authority, outlining his career highlights and the transition challenges facing retiring military personnel. The audience listened with respectful attention, but Sarah sensed they were waiting to understand why a civilian artist had been included in the program. When Harrison introduced Sarah and explained how their paths had crossed, the atmosphere in the room shifted noticeably. The story of the observed ceremony, the inspired tattoo design, and their eventual meeting struck the assembled officers as remarkable enough to command their full attention. Several began taking notes as Harrison described the specific coincidences that had marked their relationship. Sarah's portion of the presentation focused on her artistic process and what she had learned about military culture through her friendship with Harrison. She displayed images of her original sketches from the retirement ceremony alongside photographs of her completed tattoo, allowing the audience to see both her observational skills and her creative interpretation of what she had witnessed. But it was when she began describing her evolving understanding of military service and sacrifice that the room became truly quiet. Sarah spoke with genuine emotion about the privilege of friendship with people who had dedicated their lives to protecting others, and the responsibility she felt to honor that dedication through her art and advocacy. Her words carried particular weight because they came from outside the military community. Unlike the mutual support and recognition that service members provided each other, Sarah's tribute represented voluntary, civilian appreciation that asked for nothing in return. Her tattoo was not about personal connection to military service, but about respect for values and sacrifices that transcended her individual experience. The response to their presentation exceeded every expectation. During the question and answer session, senior officers shared their own stories of meaningful civilian encounters and the impact that genuine public support had on military morale and effectiveness. Several requested copies of Sarah's sketches and tattoo designs, hoping to use them as examples in their own outreach efforts. More significantly, their story sparked broader conversation about the need for programs and initiatives that could create more opportunities for authentic military-civilian connection. Too often, the relationship between these communities remained superficial and ritualistic, lacking the depth and mutual understanding that their friendship exemplified. In the days following the conference, invitations began arriving for Harrison and Sarah to share their story at additional venues. Military academies wanted them to speak to cadets about service and citizenship. Veterans organizations requested their participation in fundraising events. Civilian groups sought their perspective on supporting military families and veterans' transition. The unexpected demand forced both of them to consider whether their personal connection could evolve into a broader mission of building bridges between military and civilian communities. Neither had anticipated that their extraordinary encounter would lead to anything beyond their individual friendship, but the response to their story suggested possibilities for impact that extended far beyond their personal relationship. Sarah found herself researching military history and current policy issues with new intensity, recognizing that her role as a civilian advocate required more than good intentions and artistic talent. Harrison began developing educational programs that could help retiring veterans and their families navigate civilian relationships and career transitions more successfully. Their collaboration was producing something neither could have created individually. Sarah's artistic perspective and communication skills combined with Harrison's military experience and connections were generating new approaches to old problems. They were discovering that their different backgrounds and perspectives created synergy rather than conflict. The relationship that had begun with an impossible coincidence was evolving into a partnership dedicated to service in ways neither had originally anticipated. Sarah's role as a spectator had transformed first into personal connection and now into active advocacy. Harrison's retirement had become not an ending, but a beginning of new forms of contribution to the military community he loved. As they traveled together to speaking engagements and collaborated on writing projects, both began to recognize that their story was larger than either of them individually. They had become symbols of possibility, proof that meaningful connection could develop across seemingly insurmountable differences of background, experience, and age. The tattoo that had started everything remained a powerful reminder of how their relationship had begun, but its meaning continued to expand. What had started as Sarah's personal tribute to unknown veterans had become a bridge to personal connection, a symbol of civilian appreciation for military service, and ultimately a catalyst for broader change in how military and civilian communities understood and supported each other. Neither could predict where their partnership would ultimately lead, but both had committed to following its logical progression wherever that might take them. They had learned that some relationships transcend normal categories and expectations, creating possibilities for impact that individual effort alone could never achieve. The Spectator had become an advocate, and the retired Admiral had found in an unlikely young artist a partner capable of helping him continue serving his country in ways his military career had never contemplated. Their story was touching lives far beyond their own, and both sensed that their most significant contributions to military-civilian understanding were still ahead of them. 1 year after their first meeting at the charity gala, Sarah Martinez and Admiral James Harrison stood together on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial, preparing for what would become the most significant moment of their extraordinary partnership. They had been invited to speak at the National Memorial Day ceremony, an honor that neither had ever imagined possible when their paths first crossed in that hotel ballroom. The invitation had come from the highest levels of military leadership, recognition that their story had resonated throughout the defense community and beyond. Their message about the power of authentic civilian-military connection had influenced policy discussions, inspired new programs, and changed how many people thought about the relationship between those who serve and those they protect. Sarah stood quietly beside Harrison, still amazed by the journey that had brought her to this moment. The shy graphic designer who had once preferred observing life from coffee shop windows was about to address a national audience about service, sacrifice, and the unexpected ways that individual lives can intersect to create something larger than either person could achieve alone. The past months had transformed both their lives in ways that continued to surprise them. Their speaking engagements had evolved into a formal nonprofit organization dedicated to fostering meaningful connections between military and civilian communities. The Bridge Project, as they had named it, was developing innovative programs that went beyond traditional military appreciation events to create genuine understanding and lasting relationships. Sarah's artistic talents had found new expression through the Bridge Project's work. She had designed a series of memorial installations that were being placed at military bases and veterans' facilities across the country, each one custom created to honor the specific history and culture of its location. Her ability to translate complex emotions and experiences into visual form had become a powerful tool for helping people process grief, transition, and healing. Harrison's retirement had evolved into the most meaningful chapter of his career. His military experience and Sarah's creative perspective had combined to create educational programs that were helping both active duty personnel and veterans navigate civilian relationships more successfully. Their workshops on communication, cultural translation, and mutual understanding were being implemented throughout the military community. Their personal relationship had deepened and stabilized in ways that defied every prediction about their compatibility. The 30-year age difference, the vastly different backgrounds, and the unusual circumstances of their meeting had all become sources of strength rather than obstacles. They had discovered that genuine connection transcends conventional categories when it is based on shared values and mutual respect. The ceremony at the Lincoln Memorial brought together their personal story and their public mission in a moment of profound significance. As they prepared to speak to an audience that included military leadership, political figures, veterans, and civilians from across the country, both felt the weight of responsibility for representing something larger than themselves. Sarah spoke first, beginning with the story of the Saturday morning when she had wandered into a military ceremony as an anonymous observer. Her description of that day, now familiar to audiences across the country, still carried emotional power that moved listeners to understand their first encounter as something approaching miraculous. She spoke about the artistic process that had led her to create a tattoo design honoring military service, and the shock of discovering that her intuitive creative choices had captured specific details that held profound personal meaning for the very person who had inspired them. But, more importantly, she described what she had learned about service and sacrifice through her friendship with Harrison and her involvement with the military community. Sarah's words carried particular authority because they came from someone who had chosen to become involved rather than someone born into military culture. Her perspective as an outsider who had been genuinely transformed by her encounters with military personnel provided validation for the values and sacrifices that service members sometimes wondered if civilians truly understood or appreciated. Harrison followed with reflections on his own transformation through their relationship. He spoke about the purpose he had rediscovered in retirement, the healing that had come from sharing his son's memory with someone who honored it without having known Michael personally, and the privilege of working alongside Sarah to create new forms of service to the military community. But it was their joint conclusion that resonated most powerfully with the assembled audience. Together, they articulated a vision for military-civilian relationships based on genuine connection rather than superficial appreciation, understanding rather than empty gratitude, and shared commitment to the values that military service represents. They challenged civilian audiences to move beyond token gestures of support to develop real relationships with military families and veterans. They urged military personnel to see civilian engagement not as an obligation to endure, but as an opportunity to share the meaning and purpose that military service had given their lives. Most significantly, They presented their own relationship as proof that such connections were possible. Their story demonstrated that the barriers between military and civilian worlds were not insurmountable, and that meaningful relationships across these divides could benefit both communities while strengthening the social fabric that military service exists to protect. The response to their Memorial Day address exceeded every expectation. Media coverage brought national attention to the bridge project's work, resulting in funding offers from major foundations and partnership requests from organizations across the country. Their message had clearly struck a chord with audiences hungry for authentic examples of unity and understanding in an increasingly divided world. In the weeks following the ceremony, invitations poured in from corporate groups, educational institutions, and community organizations wanting to implement their programs or learn from their example. Sarah found herself consulting with companies seeking to support veteran employees more effectively, while Harrison advised military leaders on improving civilian outreach and community relations. Their success created new challenges as they struggled to maintain the personal authenticity that had made their message powerful while meeting the growing demand for their programs and insights. They made a conscious decision to limit their public appearances and focus on developing sustainable systems that could spread their work without requiring their constant personal involvement. Sarah's artistic practice continued to evolve as she developed new ways to visualize and communicate the experiences of military families and veterans. Her installations had become gathering places for reflection and healing, while her workshops helped other artists understand how to approach military themes with appropriate sensitivity and respect. Harrison found himself serving on advisory boards and consulting with senior military leadership on policies affecting veteran transition and civilian engagement. His unique perspective as someone who had successfully navigated his own retirement challenges while developing innovative approaches to post-military purpose made him a valuable resource for institutional change. Their personal relationship had stabilized into something that looked increasingly like a genuine partnership in every sense of the word. While they maintained separate residences and independent personal lives, their collaboration had become so seamless that neither could imagine pursuing their mission without the other. They had become a team in ways that transcended normal categories of friendship, romance, or professional partnership. The tattoo that had started everything remained a powerful symbol of their connection, but its meaning had evolved far beyond their individual story. Sarah now spoke of it as representing the invisible threads that connect all people across apparent differences, the possibility for profound connection when we remain open to unexpected encounters, and the responsibility that comes with recognizing such connections when they occur. As they reflected on their first year together during a quiet dinner overlooking San Diego Bay, both marveled at the journey that had brought them to this point. Neither could have predicted that Sarah's moment of artistic inspiration or Harrison's formal retirement would lead to a partnership that was influencing military-civilian relations across the country. Their conversation inevitably turned to the future and the possibilities that lay ahead. The bridge project was gaining momentum and resources that would allow them to expand their programs nationally. Universities were requesting their involvement in developing curriculum for military studies and civilian-military relations courses. International organizations were expressing interest in adapting their approaches for other countries struggling with similar challenges. But, perhaps most significantly, they had proven to themselves and others that meaningful connection across difference was not only possible, but transformative for everyone involved. Their relationship had demonstrated that apparent coincidences might actually be invitations to deeper understanding, and that responding to such invitations with courage and openness could create possibilities that rational planning alone could never achieve. Sarah looked out at the Pacific Ocean, remembering the morning when she had first sketched the retirement ceremony that changed everything. That anonymous observer could never have imagined the journey that would follow, but she was grateful for every step of it. Her life had acquired meaning and purpose that went far beyond her individual ambitions, connecting her to something larger and more significant than she had ever thought possible. Admiral Harrison reflected on his son Michael and the grief that had seemed unbearable just 2 years earlier. Michael's memory had been honored and given new life through Sarah's tattoo and their subsequent work together. The loss would always be painful, but it had been transformed from something that defined him into something that inspired him to continue serving others. Their story had become larger than either of them, touching lives and changing perspectives in ways that continued to surprise them. The Spectator had become a leader, and the retired Admiral had found that his most important service to his country was yet to come. Together, they had created something that honored the past while building bridges to a more connected future. As they prepared for the next phase of their work, both understood that their relationship was proof that the world contained possibilities that rational analysis could not predict or explain. They had chosen to embrace those possibilities rather than resist them, and that choice had led to impact and fulfillment beyond anything either could have imagined alone. The impossible coincidences that had brought them together had revealed themselves to be the beginning rather than the culmination of their story. They looked forward to continued service, knowing that their most significant contributions to understanding, healing, and connection were still ahead of them, waiting to be discovered through the same openness and courage that had made their extraordinary partnership possible in the first place.